The hotel room smelled like freshly laundered sheets and the faintest trace of cologne lingering in the air from the night before. I stretched out on the king-sized bed, the cool fabric of the duvet pressing against my bare skin. The midday sunlight filtered through the sheer white curtains, casting soft, golden streaks across the marble floor. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I had checked into the hotel 2 nights ago, eager for a break, a moment to escape the chaos of my everyday life. The city outside was alive with the hum of traffic, distant horns blaring, the muffled chatter of tourists strolling down the busy street. But inside this room, time felt slower, heavier, like I was floating in a different world. I let out a long sigh, running a hand through my messy hair. My phone sat on the nightstand, buzzing with unread messages, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to face anyone just yet. Instead, I reached for the remote and flicked on the TV, the low murmur of news anchors filling the room. Background noise, something to make me feel less alone. My thoughts wandered as I lay there, my body sinking into the mattress. I had been feeling restless lately, caught between the comfort of routine and the nagging feeling that something in my life was missing. Maybe that was why I booked this last-minute trip, why I needed to be somewhere unfamiliar, where no one knew me. The sound of a cart rolling down the hallway caught my attention. I frowned. Had I ordered room service? I didn't remember doing that. I sat up slightly, my brows furrowing as I listened. The wheels stopped right outside my door, followed by the soft rustling of a keycard being swiped. A jolt of unease ran through me. I hadn't asked for housekeeping either. Before I could react, the door clicked open. And then, he stepped inside. The door swung open, and for a moment time froze. He stepped in without hesitation, pushing the room service cart forward. He was young, probably around my age, with dark wavy hair, neatly styled, and sharp features that looked almost too perfect in the golden afternoon light. His crisp white uniform shirt clung to his lean frame, the top button undone just enough to reveal a glimpse of collarbone. His gaze was fixed downward, focused on maneuvering the cart, oblivious to the fact that I was lying there, completely exposed. Then he looked up. His eyes met mine, and whatever routine professionalism he had been carrying vanished in an instant. His body stiffened, his hands gripping the edge of the cart. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His eyes flickered, down to my bare chest, then lower, before he quickly snapped them back up, his face turning an unmistakable shade of red. "Oh!" His voice caught, and he turned away so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was." I scrambled for the sheet, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell?" I hissed, pulling the fabric up to cover myself. "Don't they knock before coming in?" "I did." He turned his back to me, his posture rigid. "I knocked twice. No one answered. I thought the room was empty." I could still see his reflection in the mirror across from the bed. His face was burning, his breathing slightly uneven. There was something about his reaction that made the air feel heavier, like the embarrassment in the room wasn't just mine, but his too. I exhaled sharply, trying to steady myself. "Well, it's not empty." "I can see that," he muttered. There was silence. He stood there awkwardly, clearly unsure of whether to flee or attempt some kind of damage control. I studied him for a moment. His posture was tense, but his fingers twitched at his sides like he wasn't sure what to do with them. I should have told him to leave. I should have just ended this whole awkward encounter right there. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he was still facing the door, as if afraid to turn back around. Or maybe it was the fact that for a fleeting second I'd caught something in his expression, something beyond mere embarrassment. Something like curiosity. I swallowed hard. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Daniel. Daniel." The name lingered in my head longer than it should have. I adjusted the sheet around me, my pulse still unsteady. "Look, Daniel. I'm not mad. Just, maybe next time, wait a little longer after knocking?" He nodded quickly. Right. Of course. That was, completely my fault. His voice was smooth, but there was a slight tremor to it, like he was still trying to recover. Slowly, he turned just enough to glance at me again, carefully, as if testing his own limits. His eyes lingered on my bare shoulders for half a second too long before he quickly busied himself with adjusting the items on the cart. I smirked. You don't have to pretend you didn't see anything. His hands froze. He let out a breathy, nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. I was trying to be professional. I raised an eyebrow. And how's that working out for you? He groaned, shaking his head. Not well. For some reason, that made me laugh. The tension shifted, still present, but different now. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something else. I caught myself studying him more closely, the way his jaw tensed when he was flustered, the way his fingers tapped restlessly against the handle of the cart. There was something oddly endearing about him. I should go, he said abruptly, reaching for the cart. I wasn't supposed to. Wait. The word slipped out before I could stop it. Daniel hesitated. He turned slightly, his brows furrowed, waiting for me to say something else. But I didn't know what to say. I just didn't want him to leave yet. I glanced at the cart, searching for an excuse. You might as well leave the food. His eyes darted to the covered plate, then back to me. You didn't order room service. Shit. Maybe I forgot I did. I shrugged. He narrowed his eyes, suspicious but amused. Really? I held his gaze, smirking slightly. Really? Daniel exhaled, shaking his head, but he rolled the cart closer to the table near the bed. All right. If you insist. As he lifted the tray cover, the rich aroma of something warm filled the room. Pasta, maybe. He busied himself arranging the plates, but I could see the way his ears were still tinted red. He was trying so hard to act normal, to push past whatever had just happened. But I wasn't ready to let it go just yet. So, you deliver food to a lot of naked people, or am I special? His hand jerked, nearly knocking over a glass. Jesus! He shot me a glare, but there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. You really have no shame, do you? I grinned. Not really. He shook his head, but he was biting his lip now, like he was holding back laughter. For a moment, the awkwardness melted away. The room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt lighter, almost playful. But then, just as quickly, reality seeped back in. Daniel straightened, clearing his throat. I really do need to go. My shift's almost over. I watched as he adjusted his uniform, suddenly all business again. Something in me didn't want him to leave. I knew I was pushing a boundary here, flirting with something I probably shouldn't. He was just some hotel worker, a guy doing his job. But the way he had reacted when he walked in, the way his eyes had lingered just a fraction too long, it made me wonder. Was it just embarrassment? Or was there something else? I wanted to find out. I leaned back against the pillows, tilting my head slightly. Will I see you again? Daniel hesitated at the door. His fingers hovered over the handle. He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking back, he said, Maybe. And then he was gone. I didn't expect to see Daniel again. But later that night, as the city outside pulsed with neon lights and distant sirens, a soft knock echoed through my hotel room. My heart leaped. I hesitated before getting up, the cool floor sending a shiver up my spine as I walked to the door. My pulse pounded in my ears. I told myself it could be anything. Housekeeping, a mistake, someone at the wrong room. But when I opened the door, there he was. Daniel. Out of uniform this time. He stood there in a dark hoodie, his hands tucked into the front pocket, his posture tense. His eyes flickered past me, into the room, before settling back on my face. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Did I order another meal I forgot about? A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, but it didn't last. He exhaled sharply, glancing down at his feet. I probably shouldn't be here. But you are. He nodded once, his jaw tightening. Yeah. I stepped back, silently inviting him inside. For a moment, he hesitated. But then, slowly, he stepped through the doorway, and I shut the door behind him. The room was dimly lit now, just the warm glow of a bedside lamp casting soft shadows along the walls. It felt different than before. More intimate. More dangerous. Daniel shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words weren't coming. I watched him carefully. Why are you here? He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. I don't know. It was a lie. I could feel it. The air between us was thick, electric, buzzing with something unspoken. I took a step closer. Really? Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I arched an eyebrow. You sure about that? His breath hitched. I saw it then, the shift in his expression, the hesitation, the conflict, and underneath it all, desire. It was barely there, but it was enough. A challenge burned in my chest. I moved even closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that I could see the way his fingers twitched inside his pockets, like he was forcing himself to keep them there. I lowered my voice. Did I make you uncomfortable earlier? Daniel inhaled sharply, his gaze flickering to mine. I don't know. Another lie. His breathing was uneven now. I reached out, just barely grazing my fingers against his wrist. He tensed beneath my touch but didn't pull away. His skin was warm, warmer than I expected. You can tell me the truth, I murmured. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He was battling something inside himself. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he clenched his jaw, in the way his body screamed tension while his pulse pounded beneath my fingertips. Then, so quickly I almost didn't register it, he pulled back. His hands dropped from his pockets, and he took a full step away, shaking his head. He ran both hands down his face, exhaling sharply. This was a mistake. I blinked. Daniel. But he was already moving toward the door, fingers fumbling for the handle. Panic flared in my chest. Not because I was afraid of losing something, I didn't even know what this was, but because I saw the way his hands trembled. Like he was running from something. Like he was running from himself. Daniel, wait. He stopped. His shoulders were rigid, his back rising and falling in uneven breaths. For a moment it felt like he might turn around. For a moment it felt like the space between us might snap, unravel into something irreversible. But then, he pulled open the door. And without another word, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but silence, and the ghost of something unfinished. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of what had just happened. The tension in Daniel's eyes, the way his breath hitched, the way his body betrayed him before his mind yanked him back into control. What was that? What did he feel in that moment? And why did it leave me feeling like I was the one gasping for air? The sheets felt suffocating, twisted around my legs. I threw them off and sat up, rubbing my hands down my face. The room felt emptier than before, though nothing had changed. The lamp still glowed in the corner, the city outside still hummed with distant traffic, and the air conditioning still whispered against the walls. But the absence of him was deafening. I exhaled sharply and stood, pacing toward the minibar. I didn't even want a drink. I just needed something to do, something to distract me from the gnawing feeling in my chest. I ran a hand through my hair, gripping the back of my neck. Why did this feel so unfinished? A knock. I froze. My heart slammed into my ribs. For a second I thought, no. It couldn't be. I took a slow step toward the door, my hand hovering over the handle. I swallowed hard, then opened it. A different hotel staff member stood there, holding a neatly folded set of towels. I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders unraveling into something cold and disappointed. Fresh towels, sir? I forced a smile. I'm fine, thanks. The man nodded and walked away. I shut the door, leaning my forehead against it for a moment. Daniel wasn't coming back. The realization settled like lead in my stomach. The next morning, I dragged myself down to the hotel cafe, hoping a strong coffee would snap me out of whatever this was. But as I stepped inside, my eyes landed on him before I even meant to look. Daniel. He was behind the counter, pouring a drink for a guest, his movements stiff, mechanical. His face was carefully composed, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch of his fingers as he set the cup down. He looked up, right at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Then, quickly, he dropped his gaze and turned away, busying himself with something that didn't need doing. A tight knot twisted in my chest. I moved toward the counter anyway. Daniel must have sensed me because, before I could even say anything, he stepped back, disappearing through a door labeled staff only. I stared after him, my fingers curling into my palm. So that was it. That was how he wanted to play this. Pretend it never happened. Pretend I didn't exist. Pretend whatever sparked between us last night was just some glitch in his system, something he could shake off and forget. But I couldn't forget. Not the way he looked at me. Not the way he almost stayed. And definitely not the way his hands trembled, like he was afraid of what he wanted. I took a slow sip of my coffee, staring at the door he had just walked through. This wasn't over. Not yet. I waited. Minutes passed. I kept my eyes on the staff-only door, half expecting, half hoping Daniel would step back out, maybe glance my way, maybe give me some kind of sign that last night wasn't just in my head. But he didn't. The cafe bustled around me, silverware clinking, soft chatter humming in the background, but all I could focus on was that door and the lingering weight in my chest. Maybe I should have left it alone. Maybe I should have let him walk away, let him bury whatever he felt under the neat, controlled life he had built for himself. But I wasn't sure I could. I set down my coffee and stood, pushing my chair back slowly. A few steps, and I was at the door. I glanced around. No one seemed to care where I was going. Then, without letting myself hesitate, I pushed it open. A narrow hallway. Stainless steel countertops. The scent of coffee grounds and freshly baked pastries clung to the air. And there, at the far end of the room, Daniel stood with his back to me, his hands braced against a sink, his head hanging low. I didn't say anything at first. But he must have sensed me, because his shoulders stiffened. A long silence stretched between us before he finally turned. His face was unreadable. His eyes guarded. But I caught it, just for a flicker of a second, the way his lips parted like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I took a step forward. Daniel. Don't. His voice was low, strained. I froze. His jaw tensed. His fingers curled into his palms. Then, softer this time, please. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding. Talk to me, I said quietly. Daniel's throat bobbed, his gaze flickering toward the door, like he was calculating his escape. Like he was already running again. I took another step. I know you felt it. His breath hitched. His mask cracked, just for a second. And in that second I saw everything. The fear. The longing. The battle raging inside of him. Then, just as quickly, he shut it down. His expression hardened. This can't happen. His voice was barely above a whisper. I held his gaze. Why not? His hands trembled. I saw the war in his eyes. Then, before I could say anything else, he brushed past me, walking away. Through the kitchen. Through the back exit. Gone. Again. I stood there, my heart slamming against my ribs, the ghost of his presence still lingering in the air. This wasn't over. I knew it wasn't over. But the real question was, how long would he keep running before he finally let himself stop?